you're up for a serious dose of four-wheel drive adventure, then believe you me, you've come to the right place. We're in Tasmania, home of some of the world's best four-wheel drive tracks. So jump on board for a very rough and rocky ride.
We're going to stick mainly to the wild, windswept west coast, because that's where all of the tastiest tracks are. And mud bogs, and beaches, and rock climbs. For us, the adventure starts as we leave Melbourne, boarding the recently spruced up Spirit of Tasmania. Ours was a nice flat crossing, and if you do this journey, make sure you book a porthole cabin to make the most of the trip. We left Melbourne at 9 p.m. and got into Devonport at 7 a.m, ready for a day's off-roading. On this trip, we've got 7 adventurers along for the ride. Of course, there's me, Pat Callanan, and I'm the editor of Australian Four-Wheel Drive Monthly magazine. Resident madman and bush mechanic John Ruth is up for another adventure, and piloting the 2 ARB vehicles on this trip is Mark Lowry and John Ludlam. Ant-Man, our Victorian correspondent, is on board this time around, as are our 2 expert local guides, Brian Imlach and Peter Koz. And dragged away from shooting the mating habits of hairy-nosed wombats is Peter Watts, our cameraman. We've got an eclectic bunch of Forbies this time around. First up is my slightly modified little Suzuki Sierra, and at Four-Wheel Drive Monthly we call it Project Otis. Next up is the fully kitted big gold ARB 100 Series Land Cruiser. It's got the lot. Of course, Ruthie had to bring along his old green battleship, Milo the 40 Series. And coming up the rear is the great looking ARB 79 Series Ute, featuring ARB's brand new bull bar. Well, what a great way to ease yourself into the Tassie way of off-roading. Pristine rainforest, freshwater streams and fresh air, and all this just a few hours from the ferry. This is Ring River, a stunning spot that lies between Rosebery and Zeehan. The tracks in here are fairly tight and overgrown, so bung your lights on to make sure other vehicles can see you. Just outside of Zeehan, there's a great little off-roaders playground. It's a disused quarry that's just off the side of the road, and you can't miss it. The quarry has plenty of steep and scenic terrain, and it's a good place to refresh your skills before heading off into the great unknown. There's $1 million views up here, but the only thing you'll pay for is your fuel. About 3 k's west of Zeehan, you'll find the Spray Tunnel. The tunnel used to be part of the railway line for the old Spray mine. But now that the mine is closed down, you're free to poke around the myriad of tracks and trails in the area. when it comes to portable fridges, I reckon that the only time that you can really tell whether you've bought a good one is after giving it a good caning for a couple of years, and that's what we've done with this one here. We got this ARB fridge about 2.5 years ago when they first came out, and since then it's been dragged up Cape York, across the Simpson Desert, down to Tassie, and on a whole host of other car comparos that we've done. So we've given it an absolute caning, especially on this trip. It's been left out in the wind and the rain and the sand and everything, and it has run like an absolute dream. It's kept the beers absolutely chilled to perfection. So, you know, I guess you'd call it a long-term test for the ARB fridge freezer, and it certainly gets the 4-wheel drive monthly thumbs up, and here's why. Ice cold Bogues Premium. Bloody ripper. Zeehan has a rich mining and railway heritage, so if you've got the time, soak it up a little. The museum in Zeehan is a great place to start. After a quick run on the bitumen, we hit the dirt and found our way to the mighty west coast at Granville Harbour. The well-formed track makes you feel like you're driving down an old English country lane, but the fierce surf tells you otherwise. If you're thinking of taking a dip, keep in mind that the surf and the currents here are pretty mean and could sweep you out to sea in an instant. And with no surf lifesavers nearby, it's probably not worth the risk.
We're on the rugged west coast of Tasmania at the moment, and we've stumbled across some really nice little steep sand dunes. Now, there's a few tricks to attacking these dunes. When you're heading up the hill, there's a few precautions that you need to take. The first thing is you need to travel straight up the hill. Don't attack any cross slopes because you could endanger yourself and have a bit of a rollover. The second thing is, don't be afraid to put the right boot in. You really need to do that with this really steep terrain, otherwise you'll just be stuck at the bottom. Chances are you won't get bogged and you can back off and try again, but putting the boot in doesn't hurt too much. When you get to the top of these sand dunes, you do need to pause though. Stop for a few seconds, check it out, check that if it's safe to proceed, and then you can head down the hill. You never know what could be over the other side. It could be a very steep drop off. So just pause at the top and then continue on. Now let's have a look at descending these dunes. Of course, when you're travelling down these dunes, it's just as important to avoid the cross slopes. Head straight down the dune. The other thing to keep in mind is to really be gentle with your steering effort, be gentle on the brakes. Just feather the brakes lightly, and then you won't bog down or you won't start heading off in the wrong direction. But if you do head off in the wrong direction and lose that steering, it doesn't hurt to give the vehicle just a little bit of accelerator. Just feather that accelerator, and then chances are you'll regain your steering effort and start heading bang in the right direction again.
On our way up the coast, we had a very important stop to make, finding some food. Brian donned his wetsuit and hooked up with fellow locals Mark and Dave Redpath. They were in search of fresh cray and abalone. In restaurants, these foods are considered real delicacies, but in Tassie, that's just your average campfire tucker.
How'd you go, boys?
Yeah, not too bad, Dave. Got a couple of nice ones there. That's probably the biggest one we got. That's probably
Good.
a couple of kilo, would he be?
Yeah, male or female?
There's a male, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
It's the little feelers on the back here, see? The females have got bigger ones to hold the eggs under.
And they have a few nice abs in here too.
Yeah, we've got quite a few. We've got about 15 or so of those.
That's good.
As the sun dropped over Pieman Heads, the troops were getting a little hungry, so we set the boys to work.
Well, you know, I usually do the cooking on our trips away, mostly because the other blokes, you know, they're not so crash hot at it. But we're so far away from home, this isn't our state. And Brian's here, he's going to show us a few Tasmanian tricks with these cray they caught today.
Come here, Mark. Bring a couple of crays here, buddy.
Yep, Mark's got the cray. Look at these,
Good on you,
they're
mate.
beautiful,
There's
aren't
no
they?
doubt about you, aren't they, rippers?
They're still kicking, they
They're
couldn't
still
be fresher.
kicking. There's no doubt about that, thanks, Mark.
We saw some of these cooked up Cape York a little while ago by our mate Harry, and he had his techniques. Brian, we can't wait to see how you Tasmanians do it.
Well, what I'm going to do, Johnny, I'm going to give you a couple of options.
Yep.
First up, we're going to toss these in some nice hot water.
Yep.
And one we're going to blanch for about 30 seconds. The other one we're going to cook for about 15 minutes.
Have you got to knock the ball and chain off them, mate, or what?
Oh, these comes direct up. They carry their own ball and chain. Now they might just play up a little bit. We just find it washed up around the place. A bit of a dunk in there as well. I'll nail both of them now.
Fresh cray is just jelly inside anyway, isn't it?
Basically,
You
yeah.
know, like if you
Yeah.
slit him open before you boil him,
It
it's
falls to
just,
pieces.
just falls to pieces. Yeah.
So the idea of the boiling water is to solidify him a little bit, if you like.
Great. Can't wait to see this. Can't wait to eat it, to be honest, mate.
Absolutely
Does it
fantastic.
go down well with the bogues or what?
Mate, this is the only place you can have it.
I'll tell you what,
Bogues
this is a
premium,
damn
best-
good
the best-
beer, isn't it?
It goes down with anything, doesn't it?
Good on you, mate. Righto. We've had the two cray in about 30 seconds. Brian's stoked up the fire again. One's coming out for the special Tasmanian treatment.
So basically what we do, pull him down in his tail.
Yep.
We'll stick the knife down through there. Just put him down through
Oh,
the
he still
centre.
looks a bit, you know,
Yeah,
jelly's
there's
just gone off.
plenty of
hasn't
jelly
it,
on
eh?
him. Then we just get him by the tail and we twist him. Pull as much meat as we can get.
Yep.
Okay, and the rest of it can go back in the pot.
Yep.
And we're finished with that. So then basically what we do then, we just spread him apart.
Yep.
And you can see the little dark line there.
The tract, yeah.
Yeah, so we just remove that.
That's his
That's
exhaust
his little
pipe.
bits of nasty stuff. So we,
It's not
we
just,
don't-
it's not like a prawn. It's not just something that's going to taste gritty.
No.
That's actually quite dangerous.
Yes,
so
it is.
if
Yeah,
you,
that's correct.
If you ever plan on eating cray in the bush or anywhere else for that matter, you want to make sure you get the exhaust pipe out.
so we've still got a fair little bit of jelly left in that, Ruthie.
Yeah.
So it's soft, in other words. So what we're trying to do now is make it easy so we can roll it in that egg, put it in some breadcrumb, then we'll drop it in the hot fat in the pan.
And fry her up.
But there's another little addition that we'll do to it too. We'll add a little bit of honey
Honey.
and a touch of soy sauce, just to give it a little bit of flavour.
Honey and soy sauce, where
Yes,
would we
mate.
be without them in the bush,
I
eh?
don't know, mate, but
I'll
it
tell you what.
actually just makes this crayfish so
Yeah.
nice.
Look at that flesh, it's beautiful, isn't it?
So we'll roll that in a bit of egg. That's to bind the breadcrumb to the egg. I'll just lay that out on the plate there for a minute. Roll a few of these in. Oops, done the wrong one. Go in there again.
Better have another one of those bogues and we'll give them 2 or 3 layers of crumbs each, eh? Well, hang on a minute, Brian, what are you doing? That's
mate.
bogues, mate.
Yeah, I know, but it's the bloody best stuff to try and just see how the pan, if it's hot enough to cook.
Oh, okay.
Now we're whistling away there, so
I'll tell you what,
we're
mate,
not
in
quite-
Queensland they probably shoot you for wasting beer like that, but that's all right, we're in
There's no doubt.
Tasmania.
So we're about right. Starts to bubble there nicely. It should cook that cray absolutely beautifully. So do you reckon we should drop a little bit in
Let's go for it, eh?
Okay.
I can't wait.
before
Oh, I
we
see, yeah.
give it a touch? Not on there. We'll just put that in. Just in that, just a smidgen, and a little bit of honey. Keep talking. Just a smidgen.
Righto, so we got the soy.
Yep.
Good old
A little bit
soy
of honey.
and a bit of honey.
Yep. Now what I'll do, I'll just give that a little bit of a stir around. Now, would you like to just drop that in for me,
Oh, let's go.
John, and just see how things come
Yep.
up?
I reckon that hue and pine's gone a bit soft on us, you know.
No, still cooking those
Still
straight down
cooking?
below though, bud.
Oh, yeah, okay.
That look, Ruthie, mate, that looks absolutely beautiful.
Oh,
You guys have been
no.
gas bagging that bloody long that I reckon that cray's just about cooked in there. In
You
the pot.
reckon?
You've missed it, haven't you?
You
You've been too
reckon?
busy.
We have been actually gabbling on a bit, haven't we, Ruthie?
Too busy knocking
Would
back
you
the
like to have a
bogues.
look at it?
Well,
then?
we've had a couple of bogues.
Let's
I
have it.
mean.
Let's have a look.
Pat,
Let's have a look.
Let's just lift the lid and just see what we've got in here. We'll pull that up and we'll just have a bit of a look there. And I think that's coming along
Isn't that
very
looking
nicely,
good, eh?
and I reckon that's about 15 minutes long, don't you think, boys?
How good is that?
Now what we do here, this is just a little thing that we often do, we break the horn off.
Yep.
Just like that, and then we'll hang that for a while upside down, and that'll just let any water that's in the body out of the
Oh, yeah.
pot
Yeah.
drains away and just gives him a little bit of, dries him out a little bit. So
Yeah.
we'll hang him up there for a while. He's quite warm actually.
I
You
bet
can,
he is.
you can actually see that dripping out of there now. So
Yeah.
there's quite a lot of water in it. So what we might do is go and hang it up in the local gum tree. We'll try a couple of these, John, if you like. They look like they're pretty well cooked.
Oh, they look lovely to me.
Now, matey, they might be fractionally hot.
Hey,
I better give it a crack too, mate. I can't let this go.
Excuse me. Fingers. What did you reckon, fellas?
Oh, mate, that's awesome.
You reckon that's okay?
How good
That's
is
not
that?
bad. Yep.
So Brian, we're on the spectacular Pyman River, mate. Fantastic spot to go driving, but how was this place named, the Pyman?
Well, the story goes, Pat, that there was a couple of escaped convicts were caught here back in the early 1800s, and when they opened up the bags, they found inside some human remains. That didn't go down too well, so ultimately when they took them back to the depot at Sarah Island where they escaped from, they realised then that this guy, his original trade was a pieman. So that's how the original name comes, so they say.
I wouldn't like to eat one of his pies, mate.
You could probably wash it down in some of this nice fresh water though. It wouldn't be so bad.
Absolutely. Now, this the Pyman Heads, which is just over here to our right, I heard there was a good story about some ships coming through here once upon a time.
That's right, yeah, there was a river. There was a Captain Robinson that skippered an old steamship through here apparently, and the story goes that it was a pretty wild storm, and they're bringing some mining gear up to the Corinna mines, some of the mines that are up in that particular area, and because of the pretty treacherous nature of the water behind us in the storms, they need a lot of horsepower because those old boiler steamships didn't have enough grunt to really navigate well, so they decided to smash the furniture, stoke the boilers, and Captain Robinson said, we're going to give it a run, boys. And so they battened down the hatches, so they fired the old boilers up, and in they come, and they surfed basically over the waves, with the old boilers really pouring at the black smoke from the furniture. And as they came in and breached into the shallow waters in the Karma, the boys all stood up and gave Captain Robinson the big cheer because of the braveness of trying to get the boys home.
I reckon he
It's nice to
deserved it
say.
too, mate. He's a pretty ballsy fella. Well,
Yeah,
it's
pretty
really,
brave.
it's full of fantastic history, Tassie, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of history, especially with the early miners, because there was no roads and the only way they could come in was by sea. So they had to get produce in, produce out. There's a lot of history about, you know, walking cattle from the northern part of Tasmania across the Pyman, swimming them, taking them into Zeehan, feeding the population there, you know, because that was a pretty big mining town.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of history, you know, just probably untapped in a lot of ways. It's written in books, but not a lot of people know about it. But it's very, very interesting when you get into the guts of it.
It's great, mate. I think we better keep on exploring.
I'll take you and show you a few more.
Good stuff. Thanks, mate. On our way out of Pyman Heads, we took the steep inland route, putting the Southern Ocean at our backs. This track is rocky but firm, and most mid to large sized four-wheel drives will get up here no problem. When I first got into four-wheel driving and I wanted to pack a few things in the back of my four-wheel drive, I used to go to the $2 shops and get those big clear plastic buckets, and 9 times out of 10 they would fail within the first few days of the trip because they just can't take a pounding and they can't take the load that you tend to want to put in them. They're just not strong enough. Now, the last couple of years I've been using these ARB space cases and they're bloody fantastic. They're super strong, they're waterproof, and the beauty of them is you can actually bolt them down to your vehicle. So you could, if you've got a set of roller drawers, you could bolt them through that. In the case of Otis, I've just bolted it to the tray, so there's no nasty tie downs hanging around anywhere. They've got these fantastic clips, and this one here's actually even got a little shelf inside it, so you can store a few light things up the top and then amongst all the heavy stuff underneath, but big thumbs up for the ARB space cases. We're now making our way down the coast from Granville Harbour to Trial Harbour. This is an easy track for the most part, although there are a few challenging diversions if you want to test you and your 4B. With Mount Heemskirk on your left and the ocean on your right, it's one of the prettiest tracks you'll ever find. It's a real shame that they're looking at putting wind generators along this stretch of track, which in my books will really spoil the look of the place.
Right, you're going to have to go left lock.
The beauty of Tassie is that on most tracks there are options. You can take the rough track and challenge you and your 4B, or you can take the easy track. Of course, when you mix a few ARB blokes with a few 4-wheel drive monthly fellas, we couldn't resist the challenge of the harder stuff. And the ARB vehicles were well kitted with Old Man Emu suspension and ARB air lockers front and back. Of course, where there's mud, there's 4-wheel drive monthly. They're damn polite in Tassie too. They've even got depth poles in their mud holes. How good is that?
If you're serious about your 4-wheel driving, you're going to be splashing through mud, doing all sorts of stuff. Sooner or later, you're going to have a big deluge of the stuff on the windscreen right when you don't need it. The wipers can't get it off. All the wipers will do is smear it all over the place. You need your washers to work and work well. Milos have been playing up, so I'll have a bit of a look at them. I'm having a bit of a look at them. And of course, there's such a simple system. All vehicles are pretty much the same. Basically, you have a bottle full of whatever, soapy water. Underneath, you'll find the pump. These pumps are fairly generic. In fact, you can normally buy a bottle and pump kit from Repco or somewhere like that for about $30. Nothing much can go wrong with the pump. It either works or it doesn't. If it doesn't work, there's a fair chance it's because there's no power getting to it. You can tell that usually because it sits down the bottom here, it gets wet and everything else. It'll just be the connections that are playing up. So you just pull the pin off, clean it up a bit, spray it with something, put it back on. They should go okay. The next thing that goes wrong with washers is the hose. The reason that is because most manufacturers use a nylon sort of a hose, which kinks fairly easily, and over a period of time, because it's running under the bonnet with the heat of the engine, tends to dry out, crack, all that sort of stuff. It's pretty easy to replace the hose. You just pull it off one end, pull it off the other, and whack in a new one. Costs about $1.50 a metre or something at the hardware store, as long as you get the right size. The only trick to that, though, is to watch the routing of the hose. The reason is, of course, because you need a fair bit of play around the bonnet hinge area, or it's going to pull itself off every time you open the bonnet, and you need to keep it away from hot things. hottest thing under my bonnet, except for me, is my turbo. The turbo's right up the back here. I've got to run the hose through this steel panel just to give it a little bit of protection, keep it up out of the road. The last thing that'll go wrong with your washers, and quite often the most common, especially if you park underneath gum trees full of galahs, is the washer itself, the spray nozzle end of it. Now, what a lot of people don't realise is you can buy a whole new spray nozzle setup for about $7 or $8, a generic part from any auto accessory place, and they're as good as anything the manufacturer provides. They're just fine. Just depending on the size of the washers, you can make it fit any hole, and of course it'll take the same size bit of tube. So for about $50 on the absolute outside, you could rebuild your entire washer system without any dramas. One last thing I'd better mention about these nozzles, some people haven't quite realised this, they're adjustable. Even the ones on your new car are adjustable. So if you've got the spray going right over the roof or it's hitting too low on the windscreen, just have a look and you'll see you can stick a pin in there, or you can use a little pair of pliers. You can get those nozzles spraying right in the middle of the windscreen, right where you need to see when you're in the mud. Well, now we've got the windscreen all nicely washed, I reckon it's time for a couple of throat cleansing bogues. See you later.
Well, if there's such a thing as four-wheel drive heaven, I think we found it right here on the west coast of Tasmania. We're on the Climies track and we found a little spot that seriously has the lot. Up behind me here, we've got a beautiful little babbling brook, and just over here to my right, we have a nice little rocky water crossing, and I tell you what, it's going to be a little bit difficult to negotiate, but we'll do that a little later on. Behind me, there's a stunning little waterfall, and right over here, we have one of the most spectacular views that you're ever likely to see.
When you're negotiating obstacles like this, make sure you have a guide. Listen to them and let them be your ears and eyes. If you take it slowly, it's like having 360-degree vision, because your spotter can walk around the vehicle and let you know how much clearance you have and what speed you should travel. And it's a good idea to use CBs, or at least leave the windows open to keep those communication lines open. Here, I enlisted the help of Ant-Man in getting through the rocks. Now for a quick spurt inland. If you're after a good challenging drive, take a look at Climies track. It's a good one to see how well your suspension and your diff locks work. Take a look at Otis here. See how the side biters on the Mickey Thompson claws are grabbing onto the track, especially that rear tyre. Here, Mark stops for a photo opportunity with a wheel up before heading up the track. Oh dear, here comes Ruthie. Let's see how far he can get without his air lockers, which isn't that far. But as soon as the front locker is locked in, he's out of trouble. It might look a little funny that we've chosen to attack this track while staying in the ruts, and sure, the side angles were interesting to say the least. But if we'd have stayed on the high side of the track and then accidentally slid into the ruts, the momentum from that slide could have caused us to roll over. We've seen that happen before on this track, so we didn't want it to happen to us. After camping the night at Trial Harbour, we made a mile up the beach on our way to Strawn. Conditions on the beach can range from awesome to awful, but thankfully we had a great run. When you're on the beach, make sure you take all of the usual precautions like dropping your tyre pressures to around 18 psi and carry some basic recovery gear like a snatch strap and a shovel. It's a good idea to travel in pairs so you can help or be helped if someone gets bogged. Tasmania is just as beautiful from the air. We took the opportunity to explore some of the great river gorges around Strawn. Here we're soaring above the mighty King River, whose tea-coloured water empties out into Macquarie Harbour. Just by selecting the wrong gear, Mark managed to get the 79 bogged on one of the many river crossings. we had to work fast to get him out because the water can erode the sand around the wheels and bury a vehicle pretty quickly. So we hooked her up quick smart and snatched her out. If you're carrying recovery gear, make sure it's easily accessed because in situations like this, time can be the difference between getting out or getting washed out to sea. When it comes to water crossings, Tassie throws up a whole host of new challenges to the four-wheel driver. We've got a situation here where we've got the coastline and we've got a fast-flowing little freshwater river flowing down here. Now, we need to get across the river to head back up the beach. What you need to do in this sort of situation is to start your vehicle upstream and head diagonally across the river. That way you're letting the water do a lot of the work, and if you do happen to get bogged halfway across, the sand tends to gather around the back of the tyres, not in the hubs where it can really bog you down really badly. As I speak, I'm actually sinking right down into the sand. So if you do happen to get bogged, make sure you've got another vehicle on hand to whip you either forwards or backwards through the crossing. A few other things you need to consider in a crossing like this. Sometimes if the tide is high, you're going to have ocean water rushing right up into this inlet here. Now, that could just make the crossing impassable. So what you need to do is you need to sit back, you need to wait, have a look, check what the waves are doing as they flow in and out, and if you think it's safe, make a run for it as the water level drops. Now, the gears that you should be using in this, I tend to prefer low range four-wheel drive, probably around about second gear, but that really depends on the vehicle that you're driving. What you do need to keep in mind though is don't charge the crossing too fast. That can send a spurt of water up into your engine bay and can damage some of those delicate electricals under the bonnet. But for more on that, let's have a chat to Ruthie.
The second worst thing than seeing Pat Callanan in shorts is when your engine dies in the water. In most cases it's because you're driving a petrol. Never mind, that's your problem. You really should have a snorkel on any vehicle if you intend going much above chassis height. If you're stuck without a snorkel, you've got problems because the intake air is drawn from up underneath the mudguard or whatever, pretty much restricts where you can go. Once you've got a wet filter, that's it, you're in trouble. If you're going to be going through water like this, where there's a fair chance of it coming up through the engine bay, you've got to think fairly seriously about waterproofing the thing before you actually do each crossing. Sometimes you can get away with this, one waterproofing for the week or something, but it's not something you can do now and think that's it, I've done it for the next 5 years. By waterproofing, I mean going through, getting into all the electrical connections with a bit of lanolin or CRC or something like that, giving it a good wipe, giving all the high tension leads a wipe, all the way from coils to plugs, etc. It's not definitive, but it will help. It will keep the steam out just that fraction longer, because as you know, that's what happens. You hit the water, hits the hot engine, suddenly you've got a huge steam bath happening underneath the bonnet, and that's what will stop the car. Other things you should think about depend pretty much entirely on your own vehicle, diesel, petrol, how high it is, of course, all these things are relevant. But we all know you can put something over the front, sheet, bit of plastic, something like that, get a bow wave happening, that'll give you an air bubble underneath the bonnet. Other things you might think about if you can't do that, loosen the belts so that your alternator and your fan aren't being driven. The fan's not trying to chew through the water, you're going to have slightly less splashback. There's quite a few things you can do to make a safe water crossing. A couple of things I should mention though, if you do get stuck, if you run into a bit of a ledge or something, or the thing dies and you're nearly out, don't forget you've always got a chance of winding it out on the starter motor. It's a horrible thing to do to your battery, but you can do it, and you might just get far enough to save the day. And talking about saving the day, the only rag I could find to help Pat with his car was the handbrake's best penny. So I reckon I might have to stay here in Tasmania. Oh, what a pity.
While exploring near a few lagoons, we found a real Tassie sand driving phenomenon: quicksand. Keep your eyes on the sand around the tyres and you'll see what I mean. Even though it looks fairly safe and firm, it's not. Check out how Ruthie's truck buries itself so deep and so fast.
Well, Ruthie's truck has been dropped to the chassis rails. He's got nailed in this quicksand. It was a bit of a roost, we've got to admit. Brian, one of the local fellas here, set this up. And what quicksand is a funny thing. It's where the sand is equal 50-50 with the water in the ground. It's hard to pick. You can hardly tell. The only way that you could possibly find out that it is quicksand is if you actually walked out and had a bit of a jump on it, jump around. I'll show you a little patch up here. There's a fantastic section here where if you see me moving around here and it's sucking the water up, and bang, see how deep my boots are now? It's a bit of a shocker. So the trick is when you do get stuck in the quicksand, just stop your vehicle. Don't bother trying to spin the tyres because you'll just get buried deeper and deeper. Now it's time to drag out the Warn winch.
We decided to use 2 snatch blocks here to spread the load out between the chassis rails. This stops the chassis from twisting by equalising the pressure applied. When you're doing any sort of heavy four-wheel drive recovery, it's important that you use top quality gear that's in good nick, and make sure that you've got a secure mounting system like Ruthie's ARB steel winch bar. You'll notice that Ruthie is driving at the same time as he's winching. He's using that technique to ease the load on the winch. And when you're doing double line winch pulls like this one, make sure you use a cable dampener on both cables in case the cable snaps and recoils.
We've now dragged out Ruthie's truck with the 12,000 pound Warn winch on the front of the 100 series, but you've got to have a look at this quicksand. It's unbelievable stuff. Right here was where Ruthie's back tyre was bogged. You saw how deep it was, and check this out, it's completely repaired itself. In a couple of hours you wouldn't even know that this was here.
Not far out of Strawn are the Henty sand dunes. They're a great playground for four-wheel drivers and you can spend days exploring all of the different tracks and sand blows. And unlike many of the dunes on the mainland, the Henty dunes are pristine and free of rubbish. Some of the dunes are big uns too, but there's always a great view from the top. When you take your four-wheel driving to the extreme like I have with this Suzuki, you tend to break a few things. So when you go bush, it's a good idea to have a few spares. What I've taken along here is a couple of spare CVs and some spare axles, because the CVs are actually the sort of things that are going to break on a Hilux axle most commonly when you hit the hard terrain. But a handy little tip, with all these spare parts, especially these ones that are nice and greasy, is to wrap them up in Glad Wrap. Not only does that keep the dirt and grime out of the product, but it also keeps your car nice and clean too. Well, check this out for an interesting design. Sitting on top of the 79 series, we've got this great little sawn-off looking roof rack, and to find out more about it, we've got Mark Lowry from ARB. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Thanks, Pat.
Mate, how did the design for this come about? Because I've never actually seen one quite like this.
Well, it was a bit of a one-of that we designed for the 4x4 show, and proved to be quite popular.
Okay, so you've sold a few of these?
Yeah, quite a few. Yeah, it took a lot of orders.
Are they available for just the Land Cruiser or other utes as well?
No, they'll suit any ute that's got a gutter mount type system for mounting any type of roof rack, I suppose.
Okay. Are they, what, made out of steel, aluminium?
They are steel, powder-coated steel.
Good stuff. What sort of weight can you put up here?
About 100 kilos. Most of our four-leg racks are designed to carry 100 kilos.
Good stuff. You've got me thinking, mate. I think I've worked out how to store a little bit more of that bogues on the roof of the Susie.
Very good.
Giddy up. Now, if you want someone else to do the driving for a while, when you hit Strawn, you can rest easy and jump on the West Coast Wilderness Railway. But this isn't just any normal railway. The West Coaster heads up some pretty steep terrain, and to do that, it uses the rack and pinion style ABT system to climb its way up and down the mountains. The 35-kilometre journey snakes its way from Strawn to Queenstown, crossing the King River on 2 occasions, and with a few stops at local attractions along the way. The West Coast Wilderness Railway is a restoration of the original Mount Lyell Mining Company Railway, which was built back in 1894. Of course, in those days, the carriages wouldn't have offered quite the opulence of these ones. The railway takes you through some spectacular scenery that can only be accessed by rail or air, and it breaks up an off-road journey nicely.
When it's time to refuel out in the bush, keeping the fuel clean is probably the most important factor. Wind's blowing dirt, there's crud all over the place, everything's dirty. Cleanliness is vital. You don't want rubbish in your fuel tank. So that means first thing you've got to do is give it a bit of a wipe around the lip. When you pull the cap, make sure there's no crud there ready to fall in. Give it a good wipe. Milo's been doing some dirty work lately, there's all sorts of stuff in here. And of course, don't forget to have a bit of a wipe around your fuel drum too. Wherever you've got fuel, you're going to have a little bit of seepage, you're going to have some dirt. Now, just to make doubly sure, because with bush fuel you can never be quite sure what's in the tank, it always pays to use some sort of filter. I've made one up with a bit of cloth and tape, but you can buy good filters. Don't pour fuel in without some form of filter. You'll wind up paying for it. Okay, I'll just take that in place. When you're pouring fuel, always remember to loosen off the air cock at the back of the drum, because you don't want it to glug. Okay, there we go. And that'll get me another couple of 100 k's of pure bliss. Come over the other side of the truck and I'll show you the fuel filter system I've rigged up. On this side of the truck, underneath a bit of poly pipe to protect it, I've fitted an auxiliary truck style fuel filter. Now these are a very big unit, specifically made to filter diesel fuel, but the advantage of it is, even though it's got a filter there at the engine, it's also got this drain bowl on the bottom, which means that that bowl separates out the water and the dirt and stuff like that. Now all I have to do is give that cock a little bit of a turn, and straight away I can see whether or not I've got water or dirt in the fuel. In this case I have. I've got a bit of water in there. I've also got a bit of a dribble happening here, but hey, she's an old truck, got an old owner, and dribbles are just likely to happen.
As we head south from Queenstown, the scenery speaks for itself. With Lake Burbury in the distance and steep mountains heading skyward, we were in search of some more good tracks. And those tracks didn't take us long to find. Today, we're attempting to climb the mighty Darwin Plateau. Brian tells us that the views up here are pretty special, so we're only too keen to find out. When you're heading up steep tracks like this, let the vehicle in front of you make its way up before you proceed. That way, should anything go wrong, you'll be out of harm's way and ready to help in the event of a recovery.
On a long trip like this, when we're out in the bush for, well, I think this is our 7th night, you use a lot of power. You need that power for your fridges, for your lights, things like that. In our case, we definitely use a lot of fridge power. There's two very different ways of doing it here, but they both achieve the same thing. Milo's got a pretty simple setup. It's basically just a boat switch, which selects one battery, the other battery, or puts both batteries together, or isolates both of them, depending on what I want. That means I've got the fridge and all the lights hooked up to one battery. I can isolate that battery at the end of the day and just power off that, leaving the other battery intact. Then first thing in the morning, flick over to the other battery, start it up, off she goes. Dead simple. Probably cost me a couple of days to build it though, because a lot of work went into the battery brackets, and there's, you know, probably $100, $150 worth of bits and pieces to do it. On the other hand, we've got the intelligent version of that, I guess, the one that does all the thinking for you. This is the smart solenoid system that ARB supplies, and I believe they supply it as original equipment to Toyota too, especially the brackets, which are really quite awesomely engineered. As everyone knows, strength of the battery bracket is everything in the bush because of the corrugations. This system does all the thinking for you. What that means is it keeps the starter battery isolated from the house battery at night. So the house batteries, well, as soon as you pull up, you switch the vehicle off, all the accessories, the fridge, lights, whatever, are powered off the house battery, which is independent. So therefore you can quite happily flatten that battery, and in this case it's an Exide deep cycle battery, which has got a dual function. It can also start. It's quite a clever battery, but that's another thing. And then first thing in the morning, you switch the car on, the solenoid cuts out, goes back to the other battery, bang, whoop, start up off the main battery, which has sat there all night untouched. It's a very good system. It does all the thinking for you. It basically does what that one does, but it does it in a very clever way. So you don't have to worry about it. You know, you can just get there, crack open the fridge and get straight into it. What it does do that I like, as opposed to some other dual battery systems that we've seen, is that it allows you to manually override it very quickly. All you have to do is cross out the two major points on the solenoid and bingo, you've brought both batteries into play. Should something go wrong, you can just, you know, sort it out very quickly. But from what I've seen, not much goes wrong with these systems. Costs you maybe $500 for the kit, but it's not going to take very long to fit, and that includes the battery. I didn't include the cost of the batteries in that, by the way. And I guess $700 if you get ARB to fit it. Excellent system, and for those of us who tend to enjoy ourselves a bit too much on these trips and quite often forget to switch batteries over, it's a damn good idea.
Well, here we are at the base of the Darwin Plateau track, and rumour has it that it's a pretty tough one, full of some nice big loose boulders, real double diff-lock territory. So we'd better drop the tyre pressures and give this one a crack.
Here's a great example of why we like air lockers. This cruiser is having a crack at the incline without any front or rear diff locks, and because it's steep and slippery, he has to rely on momentum to get his truck up, and in the end he doesn't make it, having to winch the rest of the way. All of the other four-wheel drives on this trip have twin air lockers, giving them far better traction by making all of the wheels spin at the same speed by cancelling out the differential action. This means I can take it much slower, and not only do I make it through pretty easily, I cause no track damage and no damage to my vehicle. If you're always relying on momentum to get you places, you're more likely to break stuff or do some serious underbody damage. We continued to climb for an hour or so until we reached the top of the range.
When you're travelling in extreme four-wheel drive terrain, rocky terrain that is, like we've been doing today, it pays to drop your tyre pressures. For your average four-wheel drive wagon, the best tyre pressure is around about 16 to 18 psi. But what I've happened to do on this vehicle is dump it a lot lower than that. I've actually dropped this tyre pressure down to around about 2 psi. This morning we actually dumped the valves before we went for a drive, but the only way I could do that is because I've fitted a set of bead locks to this vehicle. They're actually internal pneumatic bead locks, and they're called secondaires. And what these bead locks do is they actually clamp the tyre to the bead, both on the inside bead and the outside bead. Now what that means is you can basically drive at mega low pressures at very low speeds, mind you. I'm not going to drive out on the highway with these things, but you can do that all day, and I tell you what, it gives you bucket loads of traction. Your tread pattern length is just increased massively, so you've got this really large area of tyre clawing at the terrain, rather than if I was running at 35 psi, then I've just got a really small area of the tyre clawing at the terrain. So it's a great way of getting a lot further up the track.
The climb up the Darwin Plateau is well worth it. The road stops at Darwin Peak, and from here you can see across to Mount Sorrel and to Macquarie Harbour and the famous convict prison, Sarah Island. Dead set, if it's a good day and the air is clear, you'll think you're in four-wheel drive heaven.
Well folks, it's with great personal sacrifice that I bring you these images. It's been very tough getting here. I've had to ride along in my little soft top Suzuki up a pretty tough little four-wheel drive track, but alas, we do this for you. I tell you what, more seriously, if you can find a better view than this on a four-wheel drive track in Australia, please let us know at Four Wheel Drive Monthly. Send your letters into Four Wheel Drive Monthly. The competition is called I Can Find a Better View, and I'm a little bit full of it.
to 50 Silverwater Road in Silverwater. We'd love to hear about it. Seriously, this is bloody fantastic. Won't find better. After a long day on the road, we rolled out the swags near Corinna to sample some more of Ruthie's famous Waddy Waddy stew. The next morning, we were up early to jump on the famous Fat Man barge, which crosses the Pieman River. You can fit about 2 4-wheels on the barge and it costs 25 large per car. We're headed back towards the coast now, up the Balfour Track. It can be a little challenging in parts, but there are plenty of easier routes to the coast on offer. Every bloke needs his toy, I reckon, and this one's mine. This is Project Otis. It's been a project vehicle for 4 Wheel Drive Monthly magazine for the last couple of years, and over that time we've progressively built it up. It started life as a 1985 long wheelbase Suzuki Sierra, and I bought it for $300, and one of the first modifications I did was whip out that little 1.3 litre engine and put in a nice big 3.8 litre Commodore V6. It's out of a VN. I picked up the whole car complete with engine and transmission for $900, so I got it for a bit of a steal, and I had Nick Manell from Manell Motors to do the big engine conversion. Now, the Turbo 700 transmission, it's an auto, we matched that up to a Hilux transfer case, and inside that transfer case we put some Mark's Gearmaster gears. Now those gears really lower the gear big time, so it means that you've got a lot quicker throttle response, and your vehicle can actually engine brake a lot nicer and over really steep downhill sections. So very nice and very important when you put big rubber on. Speaking of big rubber, I've got some lovely stuff here. This is 35 by 15.5 inch Mickey Thompson claws, and they give you bucket loads of traction, especially on steep muddy uphills and stuff. They're near on unstoppable. The diffs we put in this vehicle, we stuck with the Hilux. Now the Hilux diffs, they give me a little bit more strength over the Suzuki, but just as importantly, they give me a lot more width. So when you're on some really serious side slopes, you can feel a little more confident that your centre of gravity isn't going to be upset and you're not going to tip over. I have tipped over once or twice, but we won't mention that. But generally, yeah, the Hilux diffs are great. Inside those Hilux diffs we put some ARB air lockers, and the air lockers, I've got to say, out of every modification on the vehicle, they are my favourite, because no matter how high you lift your vehicle, no matter how wide, The vehicle won't perform unless all four wheels are turning at once, and that's exactly what the air lockers do. They just turn your vehicle from, you know, a normal car into a full-on four-wheel drive tractor basically. And I even love the little way that when you hit the button, when you turn them off at the top of the hill, they just make a nice little psst. And it really is a top little mod for serious four-wheel drivers. To lift the truck nice and high in the air, I also have done a 2-inch body lift. I originally did the body lift myself in my shed, and we used a little bit of steel box section, but when it came to engineering time, the engineer wasn't too keen on that, so we had to go and install some solid lift blocks from Snake Racing. They're made out of aluminium, and you really can't go wrong with those things. They'll never crush. Another couple of products from Snake Racing that we've used have been the spring perches. We've also used some extended shackles in the back to give us some nice solid lift. And one of the great mods that we've put in just recently has been what's called a Snake Racing wrap bar. Now that wrap bar stops the whole back axle from twisting under acceleration, because when you stick massive power under the bonnet, and you also combine that with leaf springs, the whole back axle just wants to twist under acceleration. So, and what was happening was we were just tearing our springs apart. Putting that wrap bar in, it has saved that problem big time. The thing just accelerates now, it just squats and runs instead of really twisting around and having this wishy-washy acceleration. So, a couple of good products from Snake Racing there. What else have we done? Well, I've got a customised snorkel here. This is, funnily enough, made out of vacuum cleaner pipe. You know the ducted vacuuming that you get in some houses, the nice flash ones? Well, this is what they use to run through the house. It's nice flexible stuff. It's already survived one rollover, and it may have to survive some more, but it's a quick, cheap little modification that I guess anyone could do. Fuel tank, I've got a 110 litre out of town long ranger fuel tank, and that really is a great thing. I've never had any problems, and to be honest, I don't like going for the homemade jobs when it comes to fuel tank. It's not worth it. You can have too many problems with explosive fuel, so I prefer to stick with the professionals when it comes to fuel tanks. Any other modifications? Well, sure, I've got the worn high mount winch hanging off the front. That helps for those long competition runs in the Extreme Winch Challenge, for example, and the winch is actually powered by a triple battery system that was set up by Morrie Dick Auto Electrics down there in Boolaroo, and it really has, it's run a treat on this trip particularly. The funny thing about this vehicle, which sort of surprised me on this trip, is I have actually been able to run along the highway at reasonable speeds, at about 100, 110 at times, and the car has been ticking along fantastically. When it comes to four-wheel drive toys, this is my little favourite, and yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
Is that it? It's that easy. This is the Oz tent, and this is the first time I've ever put one up. I read the instructions very quickly. Pat said it was fairly simple, a simple sort of erection for a simple sort of fella, but that's unbelievable. Did you see that? I think that was probably less than 30 seconds, I'm not sure. It's not quite ready, there's a couple of little things have to be velcroed together by the look of it, but that's it. Look, I'm a veteran, you know, many years of camping. I've never seen anything as easy as this. All I can say is I'm going to go and get one. This is terrific. Drawbacks, are there any? The only one I can think of is the fact that you need a roof rack to carry it, because as you saw, it's fairly long. Certainly not heavy though. It wouldn't be any heavier than a typical Egyptian canvas tent about this size. It's a good shape. I like the look of this ventilation. This is a bit of a veranda that can pull out the front if you need it. But by crikey, is that it? That's the simplest erection I've ever had. Hang on a minute. Can we use that?
We've been four-wheel driving around this pristine sandy cape area for the last couple of days, and it is a truly spectacular area. Massive high sand dunes, some lovely little inland tracks, but it's an area that's under pressure. And to talk about that pressure is Brian Imlach with me today. He's been four-wheel driving through this area for the last 20 years or so, and he's also a member of the Devonport Four-Wheel Drive Club. Thanks for joining us, Brian.
Thanks, Pat.
What sort of pressures is the sandy cape area under?
It's under some fairly heavy pressure at the moment, basically because there are quite a few more people coming down to visit the area. We, as the 4-wheel drive club, have got the 4-wheel drive activities under our control, trying to work with the land managers. But there are other issues such as issues for camping, traditional activities as fishing and 4-wheel driving, motorbiking, horse riding, all those sort of things that people like to recreate at. And of course that puts a fair bit of pressure on little areas like this that are fairly sensitive.
Now, what can 4-wheel drivers do to, I guess, improve our image in this area? What can we do to preserve it?
Well, basically we need to stay to the form tracks. That's our number one priority, because the tracks are here, and unfortunately we have 10% of our population that don't respect these sort of areas, and as you can see, the damage that's caused behind us from irresponsible 4-wheel drivers. That puts a lot of pressure on people like ourselves to try and keep our activities still available for everyone to enjoy.
Well, mate, I think that's a really good message to get across. The tread lightly aspect is huge in the 4-wheel drive scene, and if we don't respect the area, then we're going to lose it.
That's right, mate.
Well, let's go and hit the tracks.
Let's do another one.
Sandy Cape is a wild and woolly place, but once you get behind those sand dunes, there are some great spots to pitch a tent. There's freshwater lagoons, grassy plains, and plenty of wildlife to keep the kids amused. Well, sadly, we've come to the end of another 4-wheel drive monthly adventure. We've enjoyed every minute of being in Tasmania, from the magnificent scenery to the challenging 4-wheel drive tracks. We have had an absolute ball. But I think I'm running late for the ferry right now, so I better go catch it. When you're in Launceston, make sure you pay a visit to the new Bogue Centre for Beer Lovers. Located at the Tamar Hotel, it's chock full of history and great beers, and is well worth a look.
ARB only sell properly engineered, reliable, quality accessories that represent excellent value. ARB, we won't let you down. Australian 4-Wheel Drive Monthly is Australia's top-selling 4-wheel drive magazine. With brilliant destinations, custom 4Bs, tips and techniques and new car reviews, Australian 4-Wheel Drive Monthly is a complete package. Subscribe now on 1800 801 647. Australian 4-Wheel Drive Monthly. Go further, go harder.